he feels more comfortable with, either in English or in their mother tongue. Okay? So, well, the idea of all this, you know, that today it's an important day, thanks to people like Virginia and Lara, okay, because they belong to the Friday for Future, and today there are a lot of movements everywhere in the world. There is a demonstration this afternoon. I guess you will give us some information about it, and well, that reached the committee. El Comité d'Empresa thought that it was a good idea to do this kind of session. First, to open our eyes a bit to the topic, and also to give voice to different social movements that are really doing a lot of work, either from social movements or also from hidden research fields. Okay, and the idea of the talk. Well, before starting, we wanted to do like kind of an analysis that was, after talking about that in the Comité d'Empresa, we reached a conclusion, and we wanted to share with you this conclusion that can be summarized in that video. If I can switch it on.
Hello, I'm from the government with an important message as we enter the third decade of the 21st century. Things are going, fine. Overall, the Amazon is fine, half of Africa is fine, so is the Arctic, Indonesia, Spain, Greece, even Greenland's on fucking fire. I mean fine. Scientists have coined a new term for this stage of climate change we're entering. We're fucked. Unlike the previous stage, which climate scientists called listen to us or we might be fucked, we're fucked is happening, and in your lifetime. This is thanks to us wasting decades piss-farting around at climate summits with non-binding emission targets, whilst handing out subsidies to climate criminals, obstructing renewables, and generally not giving a shit that rising CO2 levels are about to trigger what scientists call feedback loops. A feedback loop is the scientific term for when a species uses its own ignorance to screw itself and everything else around it so hard that its own planet tells it to git fo. Some people are already experiencing we're fucked, such as these Pacific nations facing rising sea levels, who recently begged Australia to please stop burning coal, to which Australia responded, get fucked. The combination of we're fucked and get fucked will cause wars to break out over access to food and water, except in America, where the chosen one will just nuke hunger. Would you like to know more? But please don't panic. If the realization that we're fucked troubles you, why not ride a bike to work, have shorter showers, or send thoughts and prayers? Just don't join the global climate strike this September or Extinction Rebellion in October, because a sustained collective movement would force us to take drastic action and turn this ship around, which might just be doable if enough of you demand it. Or you could go to Area 51 and demand to see the aliens, in which case, we're definitely fucked. This has been a message from your local government franchise, authorized by the Department for Going Gentle into that good night.
Okay, so I will now like to introduce you the speakers. If you go to the... So the first to be talking today, if I have the paper somewhere, somewhere it's here. Yeah. Will be Salva Puello. He's a researcher of future, of sociological futures.
Well,
yeah. Oh yes, no, here.
Okay. No, well, I never know how to define myself, but the last attempt is socio-ecological futures. Yeah.
Okay, great. He's the research head of the climate complexity, which is somehow related with the UB, despite it's related with the Institut Català de Ciències del Clima, which has been totally cut, taking into account the budget. So Meanwhile, he's got no building where to do your research, despite he's like everywhere. It's a bit delocalized between the autonoma as well, and so on. Right?
Yeah. Well, I do have a room somewhere.
Yeah.
I do not have a salary, which is a problem, no? But I have a room.
But it's interesting. I mean, the linkage he's trying to do, relating environmental studies with the implications in economy, right? And basically, because of that, it's probably hard for him to get a way to get through, right?
Yeah.
So that's ALBA. Then I will go. The next speaker is going to be Alphonse Perez. Alphonse Perez is, let's say, a grown-up social activist. He's presently working in the ODG, okay, which is l'Observatori del Deute en la Globalització. He comes from, he's had a technical background. He's an engineer in electricity. And one of his expertise is related with energy. He has also monitorized energetic security policies of the European Union. His activities include investigation, sensibilization, and political incidents in this field. He has also published many things. He's also an active writer in different media and also in the social nets. He's published a study which is opening the European Union's black box, energy metabolism, dependence, and geopolitics, and so on and so on and so on. And he also belongs to the Xarxa per la Sobirania Energètica. And then finally, we have two representatives, because if we wanted to take them all, it would be a lot of people in here. They come, as I said, from the Fridays for Future movement. Actually, I will start with Virginia. Virginia is one of the, let's say, the founders, right, of the movement in here. She's presently a student in the UPF of Global Studies. And well, besides this, his most interesting part of his life, it seems to be related with music. She's actually a singer, and that's actually what she would like to be. And she has just published how do you call that? A CD or whatever, an LP, which is Sentence to the World. A lot of sentence lately. Okay, and the idea is to use music related to as a tool of social transformation. Okay. Obviously, he's involved in so many different movements related with ecologism and other environmental issues. Finally, Lera Diaz, okay, who will be the last speaker also with Virginia. And she's a student of philosophy, politics, and economy at the UPF. And his social activism is related with different aspects, basically racism, ecologism, or feminism. So I will leave it here, and I will leave a chance for Salva to do kind of an introduction. The idea is we're going to split that in, let's say, more or less talks of half an hour. After each talk, there won't be time for questions, because we're a bit tight in time. And what we will do is after they have already spoken, all of them, then we will open the roundtable and let's say people ask questions related to whatever they have exposed, or also which is what we can do from ALBA, right? So let's leave it like this, and let's give Sal the opportunity to start.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for organizing this and for inviting me. As you see, my idea here is to try to give information so that we can collectively answer whether it is appropriate or not, the term climate emergency, which is currently used. What I'm going to say will have some similarities to the video that we just saw, and not so well explained. But okay, apart from this, let's try to do it as well. Okay, the issue of climate change comes from long ago. In fact, the first projections of global warming were published in 1896 by Arrhenius, who all the chemists here know for other works that led to his receiving the Nobel Prize. Since then, okay, many things have happened, or many things have not happened, so that we have not done very much about climate change. And this is how temperature has been rising. Okay, this plot in principle covers up to 2018. That violet dot, I added it, and it is an estimate for 2019. So this is where we are, no? Which is, if we take the average of the last 5 years, it's about 1.1 degrees above pre-industrial level. As you probably know, now people normally speaks about trying to be within, trying not to reach 1.5 degrees, no? So after all of this time not acting, now we are really very, very close to this limit that we don't want to achieve, which is a point, no? Of course, CO2, which is the main responsible for this, is increasing. This is the measurement from the 1950s up to the day before yesterday. And as you see, okay, you cannot put a value in a textbook because it's changing every very short time, no? As you know, there are also other greenhouse gases apart from CO2, such as methane and nitrous oxide, which are the main ones. They are also increasing, as you see. If we move to a broader time scale, okay, what you saw, we are here on top of the plot, and this is what happened during the last 800,000 of years with all the glaciations and interglacial cycles and so on. And you can see that in terms of CO2, we are completely outside of what has happened in the last few million of years, no? Which gives another idea that this is something that could be quite serious, no? Okay, an important thing to say is that without ecosystems, without land ecosystems and oceans taking a lot of the CO2, it would be even more serious, no? It would be the line above. So really it's super important also the role that ecosystems are doing, no? And it's important to conserve them. But okay, but it's not enough to compensate for the super quick emissions that we are producing. Even, I mean, not just the CO2 and the temperature is rising, but even the emissions themselves are rising. And despite all the parlance, as you see, these are the emissions of CO2 through time up to 2018. And as you see them, they raise. They had a small, just fall down a little bit thanks to the crisis in 2008. But apart from this, they are still rising and rising. And okay, what we saw now is where we are, no? And now I'm going to try to answer these things that I think are critical to evaluate where we can use the word emergency, which is how much time is left and if it's so important, no? So, okay, how much time is left? Now, with all of these movements that have emerged, Fridays for Future, in Catalonia, Climaxio, and all, very well known is Extinction Rebellion, which I like because of the symbol. Well, and also because of other things, no? But I like the symbol, which is a sand glass. I like it because since long ago, to try to explain climate change to people, I have been using a sunglass. A sunglass, not just to communicate urgency, which is one point, but it also serves to explain several other things about climate change. Okay, first that we can imagine that the part on top of it has to do with another problem, which is that we are becoming dependent on fossil fuels, which are non-renewable resources, so the sooner or the later they will give some trouble. And below, we can interpret it as the consequence for the climate, no? So they are two interlinked problems. And the first one, it's also serious, no? It's not the topic, it's not the main topic of today, but really, if you compare how many barrels of oil you needed to invest in terms of energy to extract, or for each barrel of oil that you invested in the United States, for example, you could get 100 barrels in 1930, just 20-something in 2000, and now you can get them basically by destroying everything with fracking, no? So it's also something serious that the sooner or the later, the fact of being so dependent of this resource is also a problem, no? So not just climate itself, but also the factors being dependent of this resource. But okay, there is something else. It's interesting that here, what you see here and what you see here, I mean, what is no longer here is here in the same amount, no? And it's interesting that really the increase of temperature is proportional, roughly, to as a first approximation, is proportional to the cumulative emissions of the past, no? So it's not just that it's not that we can now reduce emissions and then temperature will decrease. No, it's proportional to the cumulative emission. And why? Well, on the one hand, if you have, if you had a specific concentration of CO2 and you did not change it, the response of temperature would not be immediate. No, it's like when you have an electric oven that you need some time before it gets its maximum temperature. It raises through time up to some maximums, up to some asymptotic maximum, but it raises through time. On the other hand, if you emit some given amount of CO2, for example here, no, in blue you have this scenario of a specific constant concentration of CO2. Below, you have what happened in red if you emit a given amount of CO2. This is going to be absorbed by ecosystems and by the oceans, but at a decreasing rate because they are increasingly saturated ecosystems. And it happens that if you put together these two things, that you have a decreasing absorption of CO2 at an increasing temperature per amount of CO2, but also a decreasing rate. Basically, the temperature is, in this case of a given punctual emission, would be constant. And in our case, what's really happened, it's this, no? That it's proportional to the cumulative emissions, no? So it's this, no? Proportional to the cumulative emissions. And another interesting thing is that you cannot do like this, no? So really it's something that if you take seriously, not to arrive to some point, you cannot say, well, okay, but we are going to react and to solve this. No, where we get, is where we will be for centuries being optimistic. No. Unless you are super optimistic about negative emissions technologies, but there are not many grounds to be optimistic about these technologies, no? Okay. Then, which is the temperature that we think that we would not like to surpass? In the Paris Accord, in the Paris Agreement, for example, they talked about this, no? About that they committed to 2 degrees, but they would like not to overcome, not to go beyond 1.5. Which, okay, 1.5 is the one now favored by most scientists and activists and by southern countries, no? And Alphonse will speak more about the position of different countries and so on. But okay, later I will explain why 1.5. But first let's see how far we are of this target. Okay, you already saw that we are already at 1.1 degrees, which considering fluctuations could be about 1, I don't know, but okay, we are quite close. Okay, the calculations of the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, released last December, are that if we want to have 2/3 of chance to stay below 1.5 degrees, the total amount left that we can still burn, or in other words, the total amount of CO2 that we can still emit is this, 420 gigatons, counting since the 1st of January of 2018, which means that now it might be about 350, which gives an idea of how quickly this is going, no? So we have a quickly closing window if we want to stay below 1.5 degrees. Perhaps it's a little more. I mean, there are some technical here issues that are discrepant. Okay, there are some technical differences. Thinking just in terms of CO2 emissions, I would say that it's a little more, but this means perhaps that we have at most a couple of years more, no? So it makes very little difference. And on the other hand, this does not count with possible feedbacks, well, possible likely feedbacks, as when we reach this temperature, probably there will be some melting. Well, it's already occurring, some melting of permafrost that will release more greenhouse gases, and this could increase also It's not thought to produce a super quick catastrophe, but yes, to increase by perhaps 100 gigatons up to the end of the century. What you need to compensate somewhere, but anyway, there is a lot of uncertainty about the real magnitude of this. Okay, and what we need to do with emissions to stay below this target? Most scenarios that has been considered by the IPCC include that emissions go to zero around 2050 and are halfway around 2030. No? This is the basis of this sentence that we have 11 years to save the planet, which is a very vague way to say it, but the point is that, okay, if we are not midway, if we have not decreased emissions by half at around 2030, it will be almost impossible that we reach the 1.5 target, no? And also considering that we are also decreasing other greenhouse gases, which are also, of course, important. Okay, so, and which is the situation now, which probably Alphonse will explain more. If you see business as usual, okay, this would be for what emissions would have to do for 1.5 or 2 degrees. On top of that, business as usual, which goes to perhaps 3.5 at the end of the century. And if really the pledges of the Paris Agreement were satisfied just a little below, but on the same way, no? I don't know which are the novelties of this week in New York Summit. I don't know if you will say something about this. Very little, no? Yes. Okay, so why to stay below 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees, but 1.5 now is what is usually told. Is it so important? Okay, one possible question by people with some scientific information would be, okay, in the past there have been very different climates on Earth, no? So what's so wrong is now we move to a different climate. Okay, I would say that there are different problems. One is a problem of speed. I mean, very rarely changes of climate have occurred so quickly. And the problem of adaptation to this quick change is already quite apparent. For example, you see in ecosystems, no? I mean, since the temperatures are some way moving up to higher latitudes, each given temperature, no? As you warm, the temperature that you had here, now you have it here, and so on, and also in altitude. You see that many organisms are migrating, but not quickly enough to track the speed of the change in temperatures. And migration is just one part, no? There are many ways of adapting that are not quick enough to track what is going on now, which means a lot of extinctions, no? I mean, for example, even protected areas may lose their initial justification. And also for people, it's difficult to adapt so quickly, no? We know, including migrations, which are not so easy as we know, but also in many other aspects. This is one thing, no? Speed of change. Another thing is that implicitly more heat implies more extremes of different kinds, and this is something that we don't like, no? The atmosphere has more energy. Saying it very roughly, energy has more energy, then, okay, weather by itself uses to have quite erratic behavior, but the extremes are becoming even more extreme. And this is already happening, no? Like, I mean, this is the image of this September, no? Orihuela, however you want to call it, which is something that perhaps used to happen once in a century and now can be more frequent. And another point is the risk of destabilizing something bigger, no? Because we saw that we are at a point that had not been there for millions of years. If you see the last 100,000 years, you see many fluctuations, and now since 11,000 years ago, we are in a period of much more stability where all the civilizations emerged. Okay, there is some risk of destabilizing this, of having a lot self-sustained changes. I mean, don't think about this as that currently we will be like in a switchback, no, like in a montaña rusa here. No, I mean, it's changes that could be like now, no, that will take many decades or centuries or millennia, but could mean that even if we behave well, we are still suffering, future generations are still suffering change, no, are still seeing the climate changing. Okay, and why 1.5 degrees? it was, okay, it is the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, generated these plots where they tried to put different kinds of impacts, how serious they consider they would be according to temperature. Of course, this has some subjectivity, but okay, they move towards this, no? Towards 1.5 is an interesting threshold. But one thing that is more objective is that the likelihood of having this kind of transitions to a different climate regime that is self-sustaining begins to be important, or at least for parts of the Earth system, no? Begins to have a substantial change at around this temperature, no? So these are reasons to take this temperature into account, especially. And okay, then which impacts can we expect? Okay, I think you know most of these or all of them, but I will quickly review a little bit the current situation of several impacts. For example, of course, a very visible one is that ice is melting in the Arctic, in mountain glaciers. This is an image of past week, no, last Monday of Arctic ice compared with the average minimum of between 1981 and 2010, the average annual minimum, which, as you see, was already below what used to be the annual minimum. No? So, for example, the annual minimum of the Arctic ice is clearly decreasing. No? This is very apparent. And also of mountain glaciers, no? Which has many consequences because they can act as a reserve of water, for example. As you know, sea level are rising. These are projections of the report of the IPCC that was published on Wednesday, I think, 2 days ago. Okay, this for a business as usual emissions trajectory. This for one that tries to get us within 2 degrees with a 2/3 chance. As you see, okay, water is rising, and this can take many problems, especially in low altitude places like small islands or even very populated places, no, like the Nile Delta or Bangladesh. And okay, this image was a protest done by the government of one of these island states, which is Vanuatu. In 2009, they had a government session underwater to call the attention that their whole country was going underwater if we didn't act soon, no? And yeah, it's quite graphic, no? Okay, of course, heat waves are increasing. As you see also, this very recent data of amount of people subject to dangerous heat waves are increasing. With more temperature, also the atmosphere has more capacity, has more water holding capacity, which means more, on the one hand, more evaporation, on the other hand, more rain, but not in the same place or in the same moment, which means more weather extremes and also differences increasing between different places, no? We are not in a very good position. These are projections of a stream flow change for 2.7 degrees. You see a red spot and orange spot in the Mediterranean, no? So we don't have a very good position in this. This is becoming apparent. I mean, for example, you can see that trees are dying more quickly now than some time ago, and this is attributed mainly to the increase in drought. Of course, this drought fluctuates, and you have more wildland fires. Of course, there are many factors behind wildland fires, but the increasing fires in the Mediterranean this season, which is especially warm. I didn't say it, but last July was the hottest month ever recorded, no? And it carried high temperatures and high dryness, high droughts in several places, for example, all over the Mediterranean, so it has some relation to this fire on Ribera de Ebro, no? I mean, until now, in the last decades, firefighters have been really able to keep fire under control, but they are in a race against climate change. You have even a stronger effect on boreal forests, no? Because all the Arctic has been under record temperature, at some point 10 degrees above the historical mean. So, and this has produced real extreme fires. As we saw in the video, and you know, there have been also fires in other places. In the Amazon is something different. Eh? The Amazon, it was not particularly, or most of the Brazilian Amazon was not particularly dry this summer. So in this case, the effect more than climate change was political change towards the extreme right. No? But anyway, the Amazon is also threatened by climate change in general. Okay, of course, these fluctuations, these increasing droughts, these heat waves also create more instability in agriculture, and this is having strong consequences for people. For example, there were heavy droughts affecting this part of Russia, which is a very important area for production of cereals, in 2008 and 2010, and together with some other factors. Here, of course, in these kinds of issues, there are always many factors involved, like also financial speculation and so on. But it was the main trigger or the initial trigger of really high increases in food price all over the world, which means that low-income people from all over the world had trouble. No? In fact, there were increases in the hundreds of millions of malnourished people. And if you see how malnourished people are evolving, in fact, now we are in an increasing phase. There is an increasing number of malnourished people in recent years. Of course, not just because of climate change. I mean, this also has to do with neoliberal economics and many other things. But climate change is thought to play an important role, which is, so we are beginning to see something that is not just bad for ecosystems, for example, which for me would be important enough. But, and not just a nuisance for people, but really people having serious trouble. Of course, this is affecting mainly, stronger hurricanes, which is not super secure, but it seems that also with heater water, you have stronger hurricanes. And I was saying this, no, that mainly it's affecting low-income people and low-income countries, which are not the responsibles for climate change, and this is why there is an issue of climate justice that I think Alphonse will explain more. But I think that also when we speak about emergency from northern countries, many people want to know to which extent we could have so serious problems also here, no? So it will become so serious even to be an existential threat for us? Not necessarily. I mean, not necessarily, but there are some possibilities that this happens. Why? First, because climate change could be very extreme, no? This is the most trivial way. For example, if we reach not just 2 or 3.5 or 5 degrees, but 7 degrees, which will not happen in the 21st century. But if we found really ways to use very difficult to use fossil fuels, and we follow the same trajectory, it could happen in the 22nd century. Really, in many places in the world, there would be heat waves so strong that not just especially vulnerable people like now would be threatened. Now heat waves are already killing many people, but vulnerable people. But even normal people would be very, very difficult for them to live, no? Because if you combine temperature with humidity, of course humidity has a lot to do with it. But a very recent study found that even in the 21st century, in the case of China North Plain, which is super important economically and demographically and agriculturally, they have a lot of irrigated agriculture that increase a lot humidity, no? So if climate change proceeds in a business as usual way and irrigation did not decline, they will probably reduce it in this case, but if it didn't, they would have already heat waves. They would probably have heat waves strong enough to keep average people with special health issues, no? So it's something quite serious. And then another possibility is that, I talked about the issue of energy resources. What will happen with future energy availability of different kinds has a lot of uncertainty. But now we are using a lot of energy to adapt, no? And this is why we feel safe, no? For example, in 2008, there was a big drought, so people were talking even about bringing water with ships towards Barcelona. But with less energy, we could have as many problems as now they are having in low-income countries and low-income groups. And another thing is that, of course, when you have crisis, you can have conflict, no? A lot of times has been said that the Second World War had to do with the Great Depression, and now you are having crisis in many places of the world, and this could escalate to international conflict. It has already escalated to national and to some extent international context. In fact, one interesting thing that is not very often explained is that before the war in Syria, there was an unprecedented drought that can be attributed, that is attributed by models to climate change. This caused the 1.5 million people to move to the cities very quickly. You add to this similar amount of people who are Iraqi refugees, no? So refugees from the war for the upper part of the Sanglas, who also moved there. Also some other local problems, local that can have to do with international policy, but okay, other local problems. And altogether explains that there was a really critical situation that, okay, if you have a lot of people living in cities, I mean, you have cities increasing by 50% in 8 years, of course you have a very critical situation and it's easier that you get a conflict. And okay, following with the parallelism with Second World War, this conflict also resulted in an excuse when there were refugees, with an excuse for extreme right also to grow in Europe. No? So it's a kind of conflict. I mean, it's not climate, but also how society can amplify the impacts of climate change, and all of this is also taken into account, and it also implies a danger. No? And finally, let's remember finally about impacts, no? What I was saying, no? That we can cross some thresholds where some systems can keep changing by themselves and have what is called an abrupt shift, no? Abrupt that could be abrupt, taking many decades or centuries, but it means a change at some point where things begin to change by themselves. For example, in the case of the Amazon, could be really super quick. In other cases, like the stabilization of the West Antarctic ice sheet, could take perhaps centuries to melt completely, but could enter a point where even if we manage to decrease temperature, which will not happen, still it would keep melting and making sea level rise. And there are some recent models saying, okay, here you saw that there are some arrows from one of these different threatened systems to others, because now it's beginning to be thought that there could be some kind of domino effect with some abrupt change shift causing other abrupt shifts and taking the Earth to a state, to a stabilized state with much more temperature by itself, which would not happen in years or in decades. This would be a process of centuries or perhaps millennia, but would be an instance of this, no? That the system would keep temperature would keep changing by itself and causing trouble to adapt for generations. But as we have still the possibility to keep the Earth here, no? If we act quickly. So yeah, I think we have reasons to think of it as an emergency, but everybody can reach their own conclusions, no? And so what to do? To respond to this emergency, we need to change lots of things that are very deeply embedded in how society functions nowadays. I would not like to feel anybody guilty because of this. No, it has to be a collective change, but of course individual action helps a lot to advance collective change. No? But okay, we are not still at any of these temperatures that I have been mentioning. Fortunately now, perhaps in the last minute in some sense, there are unprecedented mobilizations like the ones that we have represented, like the one that we have here represented, so I think there is hope.
Okay, so now ALBA for it.
So first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for organizing this meeting and for inviting us. I'll try to do the conference in English, but if I get stuck, I will switch to Catalan, and maybe you can help me with some technical words. So, as it was said, my name is Alfons. I work in this organization, Observatori del Deute en la Globalització. It's Observatory in the Debt in Globalization. ODG was created in the year 2000, so next year we're going to be like 20 years old. And we do what the so-called activism research. So we do research about different topics. And, my topic is more like energy policies, but more the impacts on people. That's the focus. And then we try to use the results of our researches in order to advocate, to make like political changes. That's more or less what we do in the ODG. Now we have like different areas of work. I just saying that in order to know what are our views about climate change. So we work in depth on the financial dimension and financialization, the process of the financial dimension taking different sectors like energy. In my case, I work in energy and energy policies and how the financialization is affecting energy models and energy transition as well. And then we work on tourism and how tourism is like affecting like cities like Barcelona, for example. And recently we work in PPPs, like public-private partnerships, because we think that is a way to mercantilize the lives of people. That's more or less that what we do in ODG. I have to say that I have learned one thing today when I was coming here, because for me, ALBA was the Alianza Bolivariana de Nuestros Pueblos de América, and now I know that there is an ALBA in Catalonia, so I'm very glad of that. And the aim of my presentation is just, I hope it's going to be complementary with the Salva's presentation. And what I'm trying to do is I'm going to try to link that to more or less a chronology of international politics and international debates around climate change. I'm not going to go much into details. I just want to show you a bit of the narrative that are in this global layer. Okay, so first of all, I would like to say that today is a day of mobilization. You know? I'm very glad to be here in a conference, but I would like to definitely invite you to the demonstration today in Barcelona, 6 p.m. in Jardinets de Gràcia. It's going to be like a peaceful and really and a good demonstration. For us, it's like a milestone in a long process of mobilization. But we are glad to invite you, for sure, you are invited to come. So I'm going to start from here. And then I didn't say that, but I'm going to try to answer the question about if the international politics are really responding to the climate emergency. And I'm going to try to answer as well if the international politics are tackling the causes of climate change. That's more or less what I'm going to do. So I'm going to start with this chronology. The first question is, where does it start? I don't know, what is the first milestone? I mean, I have chosen this global summit of the World Climate Conference organized by the World Meteorological Organization in the 1979, so a few long time ago. And in the final agreement of this conference, they said that there was something happening in the climate, you know, and there was a potential, and there was these anthropogenic causes. I mean, there was a relation between this how we behavior and how does it affects to climate. Then the World Meteorological Organization and the UNEP. More or less, they built this IPCC, this Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's a group of scientists, I think hundreds of scientists, that are providing to the policymakers this like reports. You may know that there are like 5 scary reports. No? Every time that we have a report from the IPCC, we are like, wow, we are in the worst scenario than the previous report. So then, in the 1992, I think this is like a big milestone from the ecological movement, but also from international politics related to climate change, and I would say to environment. In the 1992, there was this Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. So they took the information from the IPCC, the first report from the IPCC is from 1990, and they said, yes, sure, there's something happening in climate. There's more than climate, there's like a global crisis. This is more or less how we call it. So because there's a problem with biodiversity as well, and with the desertification. So they create 3 conventions. The United Nations Convention on Climate Change, that is the one that is the bigger convention that has meetings every year. But then there is this biological diversity convention and another one to combat desertification. This was in the 1992, and I'm showing you that in order to show you the rims of this international and global politics. They are really slow in terms of tackling the needs of climate change. And then we have, in 1997, the Kyoto Protocol. It's quite known. But Kyoto Protocol actually is Kyoto Protocol from the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So it comes from this convention that is working on climate change. And for me, the most important thing, or the most interesting thing here, is to see how was the world at that time. You know, at that time, the world was more or less divided between industrialized countries and non-industrialized countries. So Kyoto Protocol was only putting like targets to the industrialized countries, but not the non-industrialized countries. Okay, that's more or less the division between the green ones and the ones that never ratified the Kyoto Protocol, and the blue ones. You can say the rich countries and the poor countries, the first world countries and the third world countries. We prefer to say the enriched countries and the impoverished countries, because we see a cycle between the rich and the poor that is connected. But anyway, one of the good stuff that comes from the United Nations Convention on Climate Change, the framework, is that they said that all countries have to act. They have common but differentiated responsibilities. Why? Because of the historical emissions. You know? So someone from United States does not have the same responsibility than a citizen from Bangladesh, for example. And this is really one of the fights inside this international politics. But then, suddenly these guys appear in the international context. These are the BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, what else? South Africa, and China. They become the maximum polluters. China right now is the maximum polluters, but there is a discussion who is the bigger polluter, because if you take the historical emissions or if you take the per capita, you know, China are like 1.3 billion people. So if you divide that, if you divide the emissions by 1.3 billion, the emissions are really lower. But the point is that they are here in the international context. They are not obliged to diminish their emissions by the Kyoto Protocol, and then what happened with the Kyoto Protocol is that it was obsolete at the really beginning. And this is a problem. And since then, all the summits are trying to put these guys inside a new protocol. Actually, the Kyoto Protocol is a legally binding agreement. We never had a new legally binding agreement. The Paris Agreement is a politically binding agreement, but not a legally binding agreement. So there's a big difference between that. So as I said, there were like more meetings in Copenhagen. Copenhagen was like, again, trying to put all these guys, for sure, and United States, because United States signed the Kyoto Protocol, but didn't ratify it in their national government, in the national parliament. So United States, the maximum polluter at that time, was out of the Kyoto Protocol. But then we have this Copenhagen, we're trying to put these guys inside a new protocol, or the second phase of the Kyoto Protocol, but it failed. And then we have the 2015, that it was this Paris Agreement that is really insufficient. They said that they want to limit the increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius, but there is no mechanism forces a country to set a specific target by a specific date. So it means that each country has to send the proposal to the Paris Agreement, and then, I don't know how, we're going to reach this target. You know, it's really weird. So I would say that at that point, in 1997, international politics were more or less responding to the climate change problems. But at that time, right now, with all these emerging economies or emerged economies, and the link between economic growth and emissions, nowadays this political space, the United Nations Framework on Climate Change, is not actually responding to this climate emergency or this climate crisis. So then we have the other question that it was, but is that the international politics tackling the causes of the climate change? So in my point of view, but not only my point of view, but there is a big agreement on that, climate change is mainly related to the massive burn of fossil fuels from the industrial revolution, but especially from the process of economic globalization, you know, from the 1950. You can see these graphs. So this massive burn of fossil fuels have the consequences of this massive amount of emissions sent to the atmosphere. And the second thing is the correlation between the growth of the economic growth and the growth of emissions as well. You can see it here. There's a bit of the couple here, but we are supposed, or economists say, that we are supposed to keep on growing at the same time that we are decreasing the emissions. Nowadays, so far in the history, we didn't reach this target, but they are keeping that. And I'm saying that because, you know, all these international politics are just surrounding the problem, but not tackling the problem. They know that there is like a really link between the energy consumption. Although there are a lot of politics of energy efficiency, globally there is still a link between energy consumption and emissions, and economic growth and emissions. And capitalism, the economic model we have right now globally, is like depending on fossil fuels, and especially from oil. So there was just a one single proposal proposed by the Ecuadorian government in the year 2009 that was really tackling the problem. I put this Evo Morales, and not because of the ALBA. I put the Ecuadorian president and the Bolivarian president, the president of Bolivia, because in this international context, at the time, it was around 2009, these guys were like a bit of a, I don't know, they put like some fresh air in the international context in politics. They do like two different constituent processes. So Ecuador was recognizing Mother Earth as a, how can I say, sujeto de derecho, holder of rights, right holder. So in the constitution, in the Ecuadorian constitution, they said that the Mother Earth has rights, and Evo Morales opened as well a constituent process where indigenous people were recognized in the constitution of Bolivia. So this was really a different landscape from before. And then the Ecuadorian government proposed to leave the oil in the ground. You know? This proposal, the ITT, maybe you know that, I'm just explaining something that you know, but the proposal, the Yasuni, the ITT Yasuni that comes from social movements in Ecuador is like, they have like the Amazonian region in Ecuador, as you may know, and it's really easy to know that it's really rich in terms of biodiversity, but also in terms of hydrocarbons. No? So they said to the international community, okay, we want to switch from oil and gas exportation, but we need the money because we need to, I don't know, to do some wealth redistribution between our people. So if you, international community, want to pay for the oil, the oil barrel, we want extracted. So you can buy it, but we want extracted. You should give us the money, and we want extracted. So that was really, they present that in Barcelona, in the talks in Barcelona in 2009, and was really impressive. As a proposal, was really impressive. But then what happened is that, first of all, I think Rafael Correa didn't like it a lot. That's the first question. But then international community put less bit of money for that. You know? So finally, in the 2013, they finished this proposal, and they are already extracting oil from the Yasuni. Unfortunately, but because this proposal was really a revolutionary proposal. So we say, like, keep the oil in the soil, keep the gas in the grass, and keep the coal in the hole. That's more or less the how we summarize the policies that has to be made. And then now we have a new axis. You know, before we had these guys that were proposing like I don't know, revolutionary things. And now we have these guys, Trump and Bolsonaro, that they are negationists, they are misogyn as well, and racist. But the international context now is really influenced by this guy, for sure. So it's a big hopelessness. So it's difficult to have hope in this international politics and international context. We have to understand that international politics are under a competition and conflictive relations. It's not and what we are asking here, or we're demanding, is like a collaborative or cooperative agreement. So it's really difficult to find an agreement in the international context. I personally don't believe in the international politics in order to have a big agreement that is gonna go top down and reorganize countries in order to align them to fight against climate change. Not in a human scale, maybe in a geological scale, but not in a human scale, not in the next years. And what about the EU? I just want to point that, you know, what about the EU? Because the EU has like really, I would say like targets like they want to decrease emissions for 40% in the year 2030. Yes, that's on paper, that's signed, but then if you have a look in the economics and the financial dimension, you see that all the money from public banks, the big money from public banks, like European Investment Bank, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, are going to new gas facilities. For example, this crazy gas pipeline that is coming from Turkmenistan, and is crossing Azerbaijan, and is crossing Georgia, and is crossing Turkey, Greece, Albania, until Italy. So, and it's the cost, the budget is around 45 billion euros. And they are building that right now, although there is a big opposition in Italy. There were a big opposition in Italy. So, and all these gas pipelines are like taking the money for the needs of the energy transition. They said that the gas is like a kind of a climate change, a climate friend. So, because the emissions, 10 minuts, porto o queden? Queden, perfecte. En català és més better. So they said that that all these facilities will help the energy transition in Europe, because then we can switch from coal to gas. You know? But there is a big discussion in the scientific community, because natural gas is mainly methane, like 97%, it depends on the quality of the gas. And methane, when you burn it, of course, is much better in terms of emissions, much better than coal. But there are so many leaks from the extraction site until the power plant. So if you don't consider the methane leaks, sure, natural gas is much better than coal. But if you consider all the transit and the extraction site, then there is a debate on that. And especially because methane has a global warming potential like around 80, 85 in the first 10 to 15 years. So if we are like in a climate emergency, we have to take into account these short-term targets. Politicians in the United Nations Framework on Climate Change are still using the global warming potential for methane, the number 25, and this is for the 100 years scale. So there is like this balance between this analysis in the short term and how the politicians in international politics are using these methane impacts. So what I with this infography is trying to show that if the leaks of gas are over 3%, then there is no improvement from changing coal to gas. So what we have to do is to try to think in a really future without fossil fuels. I know that it's really complicated, but this kind of stuff, what the EU is proposing, is just a transition for the energy companies as well, that they don't want to lose the share of the market. You know? That's more or less what we analyze. And here, you know, he was in the AC of environment, and he's the Spanish Dick Cheney. You know, he had some shares in the oil companies as well. So that's my last slide. So the new groups that now are like mobilizing in order to denounce climate change, they are demanding things, but they are also indignate. I don't know if it's the right word, but the indignados, because of these 3 or 4 decades that we have lost in international politics and also in national politics. And finally, it didn't work, you know. So we lost like 30 years. So, but fortunately, we have like the young ones, the Fridays for Future. We have Extinction Rebellion. We have like by 2020 we rise up. I will at the end of the conference I will ask you for a photo with a flag, because this is a thing that we did in our town just yesterday. So I have like new flags. So if you want to share a photo with the flag of by 2020 we rise up. But the point is that all these movements are like changing a little bit the strategy. So in the process of this international politics, so many organizations like my organization, but NGOs, environmental organizations, were really focused on knowledge. So we need to know what's happening, we need to know how the international politics works, and we need to advocate. You know? And now what I see is like a change in tactics and change in strategy. So because we are indignant, we see that we've lost like 3 decades. We're gonna do like more civil disobedience. We're gonna occupy spaces. We're gonna like protest. We wanna use our bodies, not only our brains. You know, that's for me really a switch in the strategy how the movements are acting right now. And for sure, we have the youngs that have like 80 years of activism abroad, and these are more or less some maps that how these groups of Extinction Rebellion are like all around the world. And this is a photo of Scientists for Future, and I'm missing one point around Barcelona. There's just few points, but I mean, there are so many groups that now are trying to act. I mean, for example, feminism is really in the agenda of these movements. I mean, ecofeminism, I would say, is really in the agenda of these movements. So we take care of ourselves. Although we are going to do like more civil disobedience, we take care of ourselves, and we take care of other groups as well. So I think that's the end, and I'm finishing again with the demonstration today in Barcelona. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. First of all, thanks for having us here. As I already said, we are members of Fridays for Future Barcelona, and we are here just to present you a little bit why are we demonstrating now? Why are we striking? So, okay, as many of you probably already know, Fridays for Future is a youth movement that was born following the action of Greta Thunberg, which is this Swedish girl who started striking in front of the Swedish Parliament because she felt that she was studying for a future that she wouldn't have. Then, yeah, she inspired a huge movement of students around the world, and this movement has arrived to Barcelona as well. And starting in February this year, yeah, we organized a group, an assembly, and we decided to create this, and we decided to join this movement. And since February, we have been demonstrating every Friday in Plaza San Jaume, and it's really impressive how much we have grown in such a short time, and how many people have joined us. And now we'll explain this later, like all these climate week in which we are right now, but it's huge to see. We started out being a group of young people, and now hundreds of organizations that are not necessarily ecologists have joined us, and we are together in this. And we are seeing that really our fight is as Alphonse said, is transversal. It not only involves ecologism, it also involves, taking care of ourselves. It also involves a change of values that I will explain more later. So, yeah, I'll change my. By the way, I'm Virginia and she's Lara. Yeah, and she'll explain why do we perceive that we are in a state of emergency, of a crisis. How so?
Yeah, and I think what she was saying. Climate justice also means social justice, because at the end we're all oppressed. Some of us are oppressed by the system, and it's killing all of us. So we're trying to change the values and the economic and political and social system to a more respectful one to all of us. So well, having heard what we have heard, it's clear now that we live under an emergency. It's a climate emergency, and young people are one of the most affected groups because they are stealing the future away from us. I mean, we're studying, stressing, working for a future we might not have. And well, Virginia will talk later about the climate change, but it is not that. It also is how work now it's going to be for us, and the labor market and the market and the future. We're living under a really big emergency, and we're facing an uncertain future. Well, the youth has suffered a downfall, especially in Spain, as a consequence of the economic system, of the economic crisis that we've been following, and we're facing challenges such as difficulty to find our first job, then really bad salaries, and well, some of us cannot get out of home because we don't have the economic resources, and also talking about politics, we're facing terrorism and nationalism, we're facing social conflicts, territorial conflicts, and it's not only climate change, it's a lot of crises. Maybe climate change is the most dangerous one, and well, our material and emotional expectations are being reduced, and the progress and the peaceful times that our mothers and grandmothers lived is been taken away from us.
Thanks. Yeah, as she was saying, I think many of us have realized that the promises that were made to us, that the world in which we were grown and the world we were promised, it's just not going to be possible. That's the first thing that we realize, thanks to all this evidence that our friends were presenting, all this evidence that the planet is warming, all this evidence that ecosystems are being destroyed. Something is wrong with that, no? And then we have this perception upon ourselves that, wait, our future is in danger. If really the consequences of all this change, of all this climate change, can be very dramatic for us. So that's why we go to the streets in the first place, because we feel threatened by all this, because we don't really have expectations in the future that was promised to us. But then there is another factor that drives us out to the streets, and it's that it's not only that we want to have that future that was promised to us, we're also questioning that. We're also questioning the basis of our lives, the basis of our society, because we realize that it's sustained upon exploitation of beings, peoples, and ecosystems all around the planet. And it seeks to do so because if, I mean, a system that seeks to grow forever, that is going to happen. And it's going to continue to happen. And many of us are questioning this. Many of us are questioning, why do we need so much energy to live, to meet our needs, when back in other times we had the same needs and we didn't need all this to meet them. So I guess we are asking for, solutions, for political solutions, but in the first place we don't really have a faith on that. Alphonse knows. I mean, we have seen the political panorama, we are aware of it, and although we are asking for solutions and we are asking for the politicians to meet the agreements, the Paris Convention and everything, many of us don't have a faith on that. So when we go to the streets, yes, we are asking for some particular things that have to be done now, because it's not only the climate, it's our health, and it's the plastic that we're eating in the fish that we are consuming every day. So these things need to be tackled now, but it goes beyond that. Like, our revolution is not just an attempt to change the current system, to amend the current system. I think it's something bigger than that. But well, she'll explain what are some of the specific measures that we are demanding, at least here in Barcelona.
Yeah, anthropogenic climate change it's a real factor. No, yesterday I was talking to one of my colleagues in college who was saying no, but we have done nothing, I mean, there's still people that do not understand what we're doing, and when there's scientific proof, and it's just a catastrophe, it's a social catastrophe, and it's a humanitarian crisis as well. So, well, Fridays for Future organized itself internationally, then locally, and also in Catalonia and in different cities. So we're independent from Greta Thunberg, we're not her, we're different. Then there's other Fridays for Future in different cities in Catalonia, in Spain, and we try to be connected, but also think globally, but act locally. And here in Barcelona, we have 7 measures, and some of these measures were to stop, they want to make a bigger airport and to reduce the tourism, to reduce the airport, and also to educate people to talk about climate change in schools, because education is what we have, knowledge is what we are, and it's important to talk about this in media and in college, and well, when we were young, to understand the problem, to do not have 18 years old and say, oh no, but it's just, it's natural. I mean, it's not natural, and it's not natural to people saying that. It's a trouble. Well, what else, Virginia? Yeah, and then Barcelona is one of the most polluting cities, and they're making some measures about the cars. Only like all cars cannot go into the city when that's not solving the problem, and electric cars are not solving the problem. The problem is the overuse of cars, the overuse of everything, the consumerism of everything, and of course it's unequal because the people who have all cars are people who cannot pay and cannot afford new cars. So we're talking about this with the mayor, and we're trying to talk about politicians, have meetings, and well, that's not enough, of course, and we're asking for a toll to stop cars and, well, shared cars. It's the future, and to reduce it, and of course public transportation.
Yeah, so I don't know how we could summarize a bit. I think everything is pretty much said. Young people today don't believe anymore in the system we were born in. I mean, not everyone. We are trying to make more people aware of it, that we cannot sustain this, that it is a crisis. That's one of our fronts, diría, frentes de acción, trying to make people aware of the crisis. And another one is to build new alternatives, to build something new. Because it's very easy to protest and say, no, we don't like this, we don't like that, but then what? So one of the things that we are doing, at least here in Barcelona, is try to build networks and connect with people who already live in a different way. We have been trying to learn about permaculture and alternative ways of life, and more in contact with the basis of life, not so much alienated from the process of obtaining the things you need to live, which is, I think, the problem in our society. We are just not aware of the cost of our life. We are externalizing it, and someone else is paying. We are going to pay, and the polar bears are going to pay, but I mean, fuck the polar bears, it's all of us. Okay, so the thing is, we need to be aware of the real cost of our life, and we say we want to live in a more simple way. Perhaps we don't need to buy a new phone every year. We don't need to buy so many things. We don't need to have so many things. Perhaps we don't need to travel to the other end of the world every summer. Okay, and this is a bit, we are building on this, and it's not something that every one of us shares, but I think that in the end, we all come to realize that the problem is that we are obsessed with accumulation. We are obsessed with having as many things as more things that we can afford, and that is something we are seriously questioning from these movements. And that is also a point where many other movements, nos juntamos, ¿no? De alguna manera, and organizing this this demonstration of today, it's amazing. As already said, hundreds of movements, organizations, associations that fight against massive tourism in Barcelona, which is kicking people out of their homes. And it's also related to climate change, of course, because the emissions of the ships and the emissions of the planes, nobody says it, but they're even worse than cars. So, it's amazing how many people have joined this fight. It's just such a great thing to be part of this movement. And I hope we are the seeds of a revolution of the thought and, the way we understand life. It's not just let's not have a climate change. It's more, it's let's rethink the basis of our lives. Let's rethink how we live. Let's rethink ourselves. Let's be more connected to every single thing. Let's understand that our actions have consequences. It's very simple. I don't know what else to say.
Well, and it's a fact that the youth has risen, and there's a lot of young people protesting and having a voice everywhere in the world, but that's because we've come to a point of no end. I mean, we're the last generation to have a voice. Humanity is facing an extinction, and it's all the crises we have behind. It's just our last chance. So that's why maybe youth has been pressured to do that. We're putting in pause our academic or personal life to do this thing that nobody asked us to do. It's just our moral responsibility. It's just a moral imperative. And, to understand this irrational system we live in, and just chaotic. There's no more things we can do. But the earth is facing a breakdown. We live in a moral, ethical, intellectual, political, and social maladjustment. And, we live in a moral incompetence where all the values that have been through generations are being put in question. And it's time to act, and it's time to act globally. It's time to put aside all of differences. We must act. All nations and sexes, ethics, ethnicities must act together. That's why we're organizing this international strike today, because we're asking politicians to take real actions now. I mean, is to put aside all the economic and all the selfish interests and put humanity, at front. And the strike it's going to be in different cities around the world. Here in Barcelona, it will start at 6 p.m. in Janeiro. You are invited. And while we're saying that, we want to say that there's a lot of people still denying the problem, a lot of politicians ignoring the problem. We're not talking enough about this big problem. Maybe we're happier, just ignoring and keep shopping and living our lives. And there's a lot of institutions and universities that have no strike today, like this one, when it's a scientific, research place, and you should believe in the power of knowledge, the power of science, of the power of truth. And we want to ask, what more do we need to say? What more do we need to see to start acting, to start advocating for life? But we're trying to make that response. We'll be striking today. And every individual, not only institutions and universities. What more important things do we have today than protesting for life, from youth, from our lives, from the lives of our loving ones, and of humanity. And I want to say thank you to ODG, to ALBA for having us, for you to listen to us, because we wouldn't be where we are today without people like you having a chance, giving us a voice, because at the end we're only young people protesting and saying things nobody wants to hear. So thank you very much, because we're here and we have this mediatic power or whatever we have, thanks to you. So thank you very much. Thank you very much to you for coming. Thank you.
The idea will now be, if you can, thanks Virginia and Lara, you can come to the table. If people has any question they want to address to the table, just let me know and I will give you the microphone.
Well, I have many questions, but first for the first speaker, which was your name, please?
Salvador.
Salvador. Yeah, I have seen that when the temperature increases every year, it goes up, down, up, down, up, down. This is summer, winter, because in summer there is more emissions or something like that.
Ah, yeah, yes, here, okay. Oh, okay. I mean, you mean the the regular one. This was CO2. It was not temperature.
Okay.
Temperature is more irregular. This one, yes, it's it's a seasonal cycle. It has to do because in the northern hemisphere, during summer and spring and so there is a higher absorption of CO2 by plants. And of course, in the southern hemisphere is the opposite, but there is much more land in the northern hemisphere, and this is why there is this regular cycle.
So in winter there is more emissions, or in summer there is more emissions?
In winter, it goes up
It goes up, okay, because there is
less
less
absorption by vegetation in the northern hemisphere.
Okay. And well, another question or remark that I had, it's, well, I have friends that are negationists as well. I believe in climate change. But at the same time, I think, well, this is really emotional to me but it's only 1 degree. And I think, well, in Lleida, for example, where I am coming from, we are at 38 or 40 degrees. I think 1 degree up, 1 degree down, it doesn't seem so much, no? So I see the practical effects of climate change because, for example, this summer, a lot of precipitations and storms and stuff, it's crazy. But how it is possible with 1 degree of temperature change so much the planet?
Okay, the issue is that this is the world average, and as you know, in each place, temperature can fluctuate a lot, and to really have the average climbing 1 degree, it means that the local change can be much bigger, no? I mean, for example, this summer, as I said, well, I don't know if I said it, but okay, I mentioned these fires in the Arctic, in Siberia especially. There were many areas in Siberia where the temperature was 10 degrees above the average of what is considered a climate standard. No?
So then there is some places.
So really, it's a problem of averaging. No? That really, when you look at the detail, when you make simulation models, when you study different systems, really, an average 1 degree more is a huge difference, no, for the world system.
What it's happening more than increasing the temperature is that in some places it's increasing a lot and in some places it's decreasing or something, no? Because, well, the average is going 1 degree up.
No, well, I mean, decreasing is almost nowhere. There are some areas in the Antarctica where it is decreasing because they have a very specific pattern of circulation that is quite close. And you can have some moments in time. Apparently in Western Europe in winter where there are some Siberian air masses coming here more often than before. This could happen, but as a transient thing while hitting. But it's okay, it's not that on average there are many places that are getting colder, no? It's that weather changes a lot, no? So okay, if at the same time you have okay, if you look at not at the average through time, but at a specific moment in time, then it's true that some places will be cool, some other places will be warm, and so. And for the average to move so up, really, okay. When you go beyond this abstract idea and you study in detail different systems and you make these simulations and everything, really you see that 1 degree is a lot. Yeah.
Maybe this thing on the average is also due to the fact that the 70% of the surface is sea, and on the sea you won't notice such big differences, big increases, that maybe just some parts of a degree, because the surface of the sea is regulated by the water temperature. This is not going to increase so much, and probably on the ground you may have increases that are of several degrees, while on the sea surface, let's say, you're measuring the temperature by buoys or something like that, you will have 0.5, 0.3, 0.7, things like that. And since it accounts for a 70% of the surface, then when you take the average, is 1 degree or or 2, but then when you look at places which are very continental, then they get the increase is much larger, probably.
Yeah, very good point. In fact, the great majority of the extra radiation that is staying within the Earth is being absorbed by the seas. No? And when you see these fluctuations in temperature, it has to do a lot with sea dynamics. No? That in the early 2000s they were absorbing a lot of heat, and then all the nihilists were very happy. You see, temperature is stopping, and then it stopped absorbing heat and at that rate, and it increased it again. But it's true that the great majority of radiation is being absorbed by the seas, and this is the main reason why the time you need up to the temperature equilibrates with or reaches the steady state that correspond to a given concentration of greenhouse gases takes many decades. No? So at the end, yes, at the end it will also warm as much as air, no? But yeah, it's something that slows it down a lot, no? In the same way as you have the maximum radiation in the solstice in the year cycle, no? But the maximum temperature occurs later. Yeah. So it's true, no? Oceans play a major role. Yeah.
I have a question concerning maybe more addressed to you, is concerning the emissions. I've been trying to inform myself, and the latest information I got was that livestock has a lot to do with it, and I wanted to know more because I have become a vegetarian since the day I heard of this, and I wanted to know, is it really that important? How is it compared with the greenhouse emissions from polluting vehicles and so? Industrial agriculture, like livestock, and so production of meat. Yeah.
I can answer. Or you want to answer too, or all of us can answer. No? Okay. Okay. Yes, I agree that it's a major. I mean, it's clear that it's a major cause, and in fact, precisely this August, there is a new report by the IPCC which was explicitly about the role of land and included the clear statement that okay, the diet that is best for climate is veganism, no? And then come vegetarianism, and then all the possibilities up to the usual one. And why this happens? Okay, it's on the one hand for simple thermodynamics, when instead of eating plants, you feed the plants to animals, and then you eat the animals, there is a lot of energy and protein that is lost in the way. So indirectly, you need much more surface to raise animals than to raise plants, no? And that to raise plants that you eat directly. And as a result of this, first it happens that meat production is the #1 cause of deforestation worldwide, no? Which means mainly tropical deforestation. For example, we were talking about before a little bit about Brazilian Amazonia. In Brazilian Amazonia, most of the land that is deforested is used for cattle raising, but the most dynamic aspects that pushes for deforestation is the production of feed that is exported to other countries. For example, here, no? I mean, here there is a lot of meat production, but almost all of the feed is imported from other countries, including Brazil. And otherwise, just with our own production, we could not have so much meat production. No? So this is one part. Another part is that specifically in the case of ruminants, like cows, because of their digestion, they produce methane. And as Alphonse said, methane has, even though it's for a shorter time span, it has a much stronger warming effect than CO2. No? So if you put together all of these factors, okay, if you asked about comparing with transport, if you take food production, everything together, I mean the production itself, but also then the processing, the transport and everything, it's even more than transport, yeah, the effect on warming. I mean, not much more, but it's even more than transportation, yeah. Yeah. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, that's one of the points that you can look at the agriculture, but agriculture is related to transport also. The different sectors has parts of the other sectors like agriculture or transport or sometimes like energy or whatever. So I just want to add that we need like some more vegetarian diets, but we need like ecological production as well, because fossil fuels are related to these fertilizers like oil and gas. For example, for the nitrogenized fertilizers, they are using like more or less the 3% of the global extraction of the natural gas. So there's not only a vegetarian diet, or vegan diet, but to really to eat like bio products. That's another point. Maybe you want to add something?
Maybe I'm vegan, but it's not only the diet, but to be careful what you eat and where do you buy the things, and where you talk about bio products, and be careful because there's a lot of bio brands that are like greenwashing, and if you're vegan, or vegetarian, try not to buy products with plastic, and also inform yourself about where the products come from, and always try to buy products locally. Just reduce as well meat production and eggs and dairy. Of course, dairy it also consumes a lot. But there's a lot of products that are not animal, do not come from animal products, that also have a lot of ecological impact, that I try to stay away as well. So it just depends on the person, and of course, where do you buy it and where does it come from.
Would like to add a small advertisement. Remember that in ALBA we have Ecological Products Consumer Association. Yeah, remember? Yeah? People can join to it whenever you want. Yeah. Okay, so that's one thing. Then the second is I have a question for Alphonse. You left a concept which is ecofeminism. Can you please extend it a bit?
I can do it, but do you want to explain it? Okay, it's not that easy. No, but ecofeminism is like an intersection between but maybe the intersection is not the word, but I mean, it comes from these two currents of thinking, like feminism and environmentalism. And it says that, of course, we are vulnerable, so we have to take care of ourselves. So this is especially when we are like really born or when we are really old. So we need to be, we are interdependent. So we have, our bodies are vulnerable, but also we need to have like a healthy environment. So we have to take care of ourselves, but we have to take care of the Mother Earth, whatever. If you are Pachamanist, you will say Mother Earth. I like this word. But we have to take care of our ecosystems, because what did happen with the Industrial Revolution and all this technology, we have like a layer of technology that we are not in direct relation, as Birch said before. We are not in direct relation with the Mother Earth. So ecofeminism is trying to tell us that we are really a part of the Mother Earth, so we have to take care of it. So that's more or less and there's a lot of different approaches of ecofeminism. So there are some that are more spiritual. There are more. Some of them are more into politics. But I definitely think that the most revolutionary way of transforming our way of life, as our friends from Friday for Future said, is through this path of ecofeminism, because it's challenging almost everything we know, and it's really, really nice. And maybe you know, we have in the Spanish state, we have like Yayo Herrero, that is one of the big I don't know, references in I would say internationally. So if you never heard Yayo Herrero, just go to the YouTube and put Yayo Herrero, and if it with half an hour she's like, I don't know, giving some thoughts about ecofeminism. Really, she's really good on that. So we are very glad to have Yayo Herrero between us. But not only Yayo Herrero, in Catalonia and in Barcelona, there are so many people that is not only leading or giving chats or conferences, but working on ecofeminism day by day. And as a ODG, we are doing a transition towards ecofeminism. So we want to take care of ourselves and take care of what are the impacts on our daily basis work. I'm not sure for sure.
Yayo Herrero is going to be at Plaza San Jaume today at 1 p.m. So we're probably gonna miss her, but she came to give a speech about ecofeminism. So yeah, she's our queen.
But I wanted to add that the philosophy in it is as well as see women as creators and as life, as nature is, a way of life, and also that we have, we think we're kind of gods. We think that we're more important than nature, that we can mess up with earth and everything, and that's kind of what men did to women, so to equal men and women, well, sexes, gender, whatever, and also respect sexes and respect the Mother Earth, to see it as a creation and everything. That's maybe the philosophy that I kind of follow. But well.
I would like to say something too, because now I was thinking about the a satiric cover of a non-existing denialist journal, that one of the titles in the cover was eating plants and other symptoms that you are gay. And okay, I think that there is much truth in this. No, my perception is that really there are some changes that are necessary, but that the mentality of hegemonic masculinity can be an obstacle for this. No, so yeah, this is one of the reasons that also make me think that there is a lot of truth in ecofeminism. No?
Okay, fine.
Well, thank you. If we could write an ideal wish list of energy supply mix for the population, for Europe, what will be the role of nuclear energy in this mix? Because, for example, this has the potential to supply unlimited energy without zero emissions, and much more if we consider the power plants with fast neutrons, not the current ones, which can only burn less than 1% of the total uranium.
The total uranium of the Earth doesn't match with the total uranium that can be used for nuclear energy. Actually, the only reason why we are reducing the nuclear arm, the nuclear weapons, is because we need the uranium on these weapons for our actual consumption of nuclear energy. In fact, the war in Mali, the only reason that we are keeping a war in Mali that is not in the news is because it's the only supply that we have for Europe for uranium for nuclear energy. Actually, the uranium is no longer a possible source of energy for humanity. It's simply because of that. Yeah? But then the problem is the efficiency. You are losing efficiency and you are going again to a non-renewable source of energy that is just a patch for decades. And it's just a patch. Well, this is my answer. If anyone other has another answer. But well, we have to think, in Europe, we have no actual source for uranium, only a war that we are keeping going on Mali to keep the supply of uranium ongoing. This is the only thing we have. So at least for Europe, it's not a solution, unless you want to keep this war going on. I mean, actually, we can use uranium because it's cheap because we keep the French army in a country just to keep this supply going on. What's the cost of this army?
Thought-provoking questions. So, anyone else there?
Okay, about this, perhaps we can say something. Do you want to say, or take the micro? Okay, something about this. I'm no expert in nuclear energy, the first thing I have to say. But okay, for what I know, the problem with breeding reactors, or a big problem with breeding reactors, is that they provide what you need to build nuclear weapons. No? So there is a problem with the risk of proliferation. And for me, really, in a situation that can become more critical, this problem is also worth taking into account. No? I mean, I see it's very difficult to evaluate pros and cons. About nuclear fusion, of course, to begin with, it's in the best of scenarios decades away. And also an interesting thing that some people say is that if you wait decades and then you invest the energy to expand it, I mean, during decades you are still absorbing the energy that you need to expand it. No? So, well, and this is true apparently for all sorts of energy, no? That while you expand it, you are consuming a lot of energy. So it seems that really, for this and for other reasons, I tend to think that really it's necessary to reduce energy consumption, no? First of all. And renewable, and in the case of renewable energy, it's also true that its efficiency, it's increasing very quickly. Of course, it has limits, no? Because at least the surface, perhaps also some materials, but this is not so clear with new technologies, but it has a surface limit, no? But within these limits, it seems that it's really becoming competitive with nuclear energy. So in principle, I would not risk all of this issue of proliferation. But okay, as I say, I'm no expert in nuclear energy, so I cannot really say it's a really strong evaluation. No, these are my thoughts.
Yeah, well, I just want to highlight some points and make some questions. Well, about the fusion, well, fusion is not that clean, so it produces activated material with neutrons, and maybe it's not that clean, but okay. In general, what I understand is the atmosphere increases its temperature because it's gaining energy because the gas composition, and the more CO2 methane we have in the atmosphere, the more energy there is there, and the most extreme climate we have with hurricanes and catastrophic rains and so on. But then what is bothering me is you say that some of the CO2 is absorbed by the ocean, but at some point the ocean stops absorbing, it's saturated, like the beer when you put CO2 in the beer. Or if we are burning, if the extreme climate is worse every time we increase the temperature, we have more fires on the forest. The forest produce more CO2. So, and if we frost, if we descongelamos, unfrost the permafrost and so on, and we have more methane emission, we worsen it. So this comes exponentially. It looks like we will explode if we are not cutting drastically the emissions of the temperature. So the small increases of temperature will produce more emissions because more fires we have. So this worries me, and I don't know about the saturation of the sea. And so.
Okay, yeah, I mean, a slide that I put, you saw that possibility that the Earth was by itself going to what was called Hothouse Scenario. No, this is a possibility. I mean, there should be some threshold where still the negative feedbacks are stronger than the positive, or that the positive feedbacks become stronger, and really where this threshold is not known, but probably it could be at some point around 2 degrees. No, some people think, but really the basis is still very weak to try to quantify where the threshold is. And okay, about the specific feedbacks, yeah, for example, in the Amazon, at some point it could be very quick. No, I mean, suddenly it could move from having virtually no fire in intact forest. I mean, there is a lot of fire in degraded areas, no? But in intact rainforest, there is almost no fire. And suddenly you can move to at some threshold to have super big fires, no? Like a very quick transition. And yes, this will add to the CO2 of the atmosphere. About melting that you said and the release of trapped greenhouse gases, there is a lot of uncertainty about the rate it can take. I mean, it is thought that if you reach, even at 1.5 degrees, this will happen. But the rate, there is a lot of uncertainty. All in all, it is not thought that it will make a super big difference during the 21st century. I mean, yes, it can increase perhaps by 100 or 200 gigatons what you need to absorb. No, the problem is then that you need to absorb it. There is a lot of limitations to absorb it. No, there is also a problem. But yeah, it's a real issue, and there are many limitations. And about ocean absorption, another thing to say is that, okay, the positive thing is that when the ocean absorbs CO2, there is less CO2 in the atmosphere. But then there is also a negative part, no? That is that when the ocean absorbs CO2, it's becoming more acid. It's becoming more acid. And when it becomes more acid, it's a very serious threat for coral reefs and for many organisms. No? So in any case, there are problems everywhere, no? Unless we change something drastically.
Okay, so I think there's time for one or two more questions.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much to give us a view on the topic from the different positions and from the different groups. And I was wondering, do you think it's possible, like, to have a list of actions where we all can agree on what we would like to do for preventing this? I mean, I can see we would like to prevent this climate change or slow it down, but do you think we can, like, agree on specific things we can all do to prevent this? Like, I give you an example. In Germany, there's a lot of talk about this, but every little proposal which is made to prevent the climate change is like pushed down by one group or the other one. Like, one easy example was to have everybody on Fridays does not eat meat. So we have a veggie day in Germany, and this was pushed down immediately. Another example was to have like a speed limit on the highways, and this was pushed down immediately. So there is no, I have the feeling whatever action we can imagine could be done against the climate change, there is no agreement between us, not in between the Fridays for Future and not between the groups somehow.
I just want to complement this question, because the one I wanted to do was kind of similar. I want to reduce the scope a little bit and say, these talks have been organized by the committee, by the workers' committee. So I am interested in the scope of what can we do from within an organization like this. If you have ideas or links or suggestions of how to link to other people, if you know of other people who might be interested in building a network or have proposals for actual measures that can be taken within an organization that we can push inside, in this case inside ALBA, as workers, we can push for them, like reducing the plastic bottle, for example, which is one of them.
It was actually an exam, and you didn't pass it because none of you use it. Great done. That's coherent.
Well, I will try to answer the two questions. Organize ourselves, it's difficult. So society is complex because individuals itself, we are complex, okay? And that's why maybe we're in a social catastrophe or something like that, because it's really difficult to, to make agreements that please everyone. That's almost never going to happen. You know that's I'm studying politics, and it's conflicts and authority and power. It's very difficult. We're trying to solve that problems, and we know we're not perfect. We're not a perfect movement, but we're trying to. And as what you said, it's to try to make measures or to make changes. You need to be active. You need to make a group of workers that you want to change something or whatever. You need to talk, make maybe assemblies, or and then start being active, maybe sending emails or talking to to the chiefs, and suddenly you're going to, maybe put some vegan options or vegetarian options at the cafeteria. Maybe, you need to talk and see the needs of your institution and what you can do. As for today, maybe striking, or not striking today, but maybe for the next strike, trying to make a big strike, and you're scientists. I mean, you have you do the research, a lot of knowledge, and maybe we don't. So maybe try to expose that knowledge in climate change to children, maybe to media. I don't know. I write articles about feminism. So, try to imagine what you can do and do not put limits on yourself, and just try to complement your personal life with this, and you will go as far as you can. And well, what you said, we have 7 measures that we presented with different ecological sustainable movements in Barcelona to the mayor. And well, it was difficult to make an agreement, but we did. Now, as if politicians are going to do it, there's always lobbies, and there's always the economic interest where I can do nothing. I mean, I'm an activist. I do not have any power as well. I eat at home. I mean, so I can not say what they're going to be. That's a structural problem that, the power is within very few people, and that's, democracy.
Okay. Okay, you ask for solutions that everyone can agree with, and I don't think that's possible. Like, perhaps we don't want to seek solutions that every single person in the world will agree with, but we need to, I don't know, ¿cómo se diría? Hacer piña por una manera de pensar que al final vaya haciendo más piña. O sea, in the end, of course, you're always going to have people who don't agree with you, but when you surround yourself with people who think in that way, and you haces divulgación y tal, se crea como una manera de hacer las cosas, and things can change. And some years ago, people used to smoke in closed areas, and now they don't because nobody does it. And se crea como la idea de que eso está mal. Perhaps in 2 years, this will be a crime. Like, for me, this is a crime. For you, it may not be. But if more people in your working areas, en tu entorno, empiezan a verlo de esa manera, es que se va formando solo. ¿Sabes? Es como una piedra que va rodando por la montaña y va cogiendo. I mean, it's difficult, but it's not so. I mean, why don't you start not doing it? You need to try harder. It takes personal sacrifices, but it's much easier when you talk to other people and you see, hey, estamos de acuerdo con esto, entonces si lo haces tú, lo hago yo y lo hace el otro. Si me preguntas por qué... I'm sorry, I'm talking in Spanish. Do you all understand it? Okay, let's do it in English. If you are in your daily environment and you talk to people and you agree to do things in a certain way, es que vas solo. I mean, no sé qué más decir, aparte de lo que ha dicho ella. No.
Yeah, for me, I mean, to find an agreement is a good question, because it's one of the key challenges. Not only, I don't know, for example, right now in Barcelona we have like 6 different groups like working on climate, like climate neighbor. No, how is it? Barris pel Clima, so neighborhoods for climate, climate action, Fridays for Future, Extinction Rebellion, Families for Future, and the last one I don't remember. So then we have like so many like groups that they have to find an agreement. So I would say that it's easier for them to find an agreement. For example, this is an agreement. I don't know if it's directly fighting against climate change, but this is an agreement from social movements. But I think you ask for an agreement that can be pushed to politicians in order to, for example, to build to make a new law or something like that. This is really challenging and really difficult. I do agree with Beach. that this is kind of a critical mass is a very important thing in order to advocate. See if there are I don't know, so many people demanding a thing, it's easier to push for to do the advocacy work, and it's
and to change the minds of the other people. I mean, right now they may not think the way you, I mean, quizá ahora van a estar en desacuerdo contigo, but in some years they might agree if you present the problem to them, you know?
But anyway, I think is a good question how we balance, because now we are saying that we are like facing a new I don't know, new movement of mobilization, that we're going to use this civil disobedience and advocacy work. Sometimes they are in the contrary way, you know, because I don't know. You may know that there's maybe they can like point at you like you are violent and things like that. So let's see how it works. But for me, the most important thing is that now we have more critical mass. That's definitely one part of this demonstration. And then just I just want to answer quickly to the question of what you can do here. I won't answer the question like completely, but you know that there was like a big debate between trade unions and environmentalists about this energy, not this socio-ecological transition, because workers are really affected by this socio-ecological transition, especially the ones that are working in like I don't know, heavy industry. No? So they finally had this agreement of just transition. So maybe you can like just explore that. I'm sure that you know that, but I don't know if there is a scientist just transition or something like that. So I mean, but this is I think a good way to start to have like a dialogue that sometimes is very difficult between trade unions and environmentalist or ecological movements.
Yeah. I will add a specific thing that I guess most people here are scientists, right? And no? 1/3. Okay, then this is mainly for this third, and perhaps not so much for the committee, but for the scientific community. I think something important is that, okay, all of us know many things that we can do in our lives to be more climate friendly, but one thing that as a scientist that I know is very difficult for scientists is flying less, no? And this is super important. And now there are increasing number of scientists who are signing that they are going to try to fly less, and who are claiming to trying to find ways so that the scientific careers and the way science function is reorganized so that people do not need to fly so much. No? So I think that this is an interesting debate to put on the table.
If you take the car, it's less. It consumes less than with a flight for doing the same trajectory.
I mean, if the trajectory is not thousands of kilometers, for sure the airplane consumes much more. And even for thousands of kilometers, now I'm not completely sure, but well, yeah, it also depends on how many people there is in the car, no? And now I'm not sure, but I would say that if it's several thousand kilometers and the car full, then it can be better the car, but okay. You have railways, and you have, if it's online, you have railways, and I always try to use railways. Huh? And video conferencing, of course. Video conferencing.
Yes, you talked also about changing the economic model, this economic model, capitalism. There is one patch that I know, which is called common good economy, and I don't know if you would like to say something about that, because common good economy tries that you consume to add a tax, more or less, to what is less ecological or treats worse to the world or to the resources, and that the products which are more ecological would not have this tax, so that would be more cheaper. I mean, this idea is floating some years in the world, and I don't know if you have an opinion regarding to this. And just answering, so what we can do, we can add another part, which is what we can do at ALBA. I think at ALBA we have a lot of public procurement. We are buying a lot of stuff from many departments, and I mean, for instance, in my group, I cannot add an extra request to to add extra points to the companies according to their ecological results or whatever, because I mean that's something that in like I think in Barcelona has been done. In some public places, we have the strength to push these points to be in the public tenders, so that the most ecological companies get more awarded contracts and not the less ecological ones, at least.
Okay, about the economy for the common good. Yeah, of course, one problem is that firms are competing in the market as it functions, and it pushes them to try to obtain the maximum, either the maximum profits or the maximum growth, no? At some point, or some point in between. And yeah, this involves that they are pushed to environmental degradation. You talk about taxes. Taxes is a very old proposal, and it's part of it, yeah. But I agree that the proposal of the economy for the common good is interesting in that it goes even beyond, no? Because with taxes, okay, firms can still look for their optimum to obtain the maximum revenue, which can be just fit some tax or even try to try to do as if they were reducing emissions and not really reducing. I mean, these things that are happening, no? And that carbon market makes it easy sometimes. And it's interesting in the economy for the common good that, okay, the basis is that, okay, to have, for people who don't know it, the basis is to have what they call a common good balance sheet, which is based on, which is something similar to financial balance sheets, but quantifying many things that have to do with this, what these firms do socially and environmentally, no? And that theoretically it should be produced by their own firm, but then audited, no? Which of course there is also some room here for doing things not honestly, but okay. I find it interesting because it produces a kind of, well, I mean, in markets from the point of view of what is called evolutionary economics, there is like something similar to natural selection that favors certain firms or certain kinds of firms, no? And I find interesting this idea because it's in a way that, in a self-organized way, because some firms can favor other firms by cooperating with them, by using them for their own procurement, and also citizens and public institutions and ethical banks and everything. You can have a kind of self-organized selection pressure that gives an opportunity for firms that really, honestly, their intention is not to earn as much money as possible, but to do things differently, no? So I do find it an interesting idea. Perhaps not the only one, but I find an interesting idea. Well, and about this, it's interesting that, for example, here the network of solidarity economy is also applying something similar since long ago, even since before the economy for the common good started. But I'm thinking of them as complementary, no? That like the solidarity economy network are like the bunch of peoples, no? That from the pupils, that from the beginning they try to change the system. And I see this of the economy for the common good as a way, as a good mechanism to try to have other firms changing gradually. No? So yeah.
So I'm sorry, but I have to cut it here, especially because all of them have to rush to the center of Barcelona to keep on moving. So I would like to thank you. Thanks for coming. Thanks you also here for listening to that hope that we have here. Okay. And did you say something about a picture? Yeah, Alphonse? Okay.
A way of reciprocity.
Yeah.
So we came here, so we asked you to have the photo with.
So would you like to come here and then we take a picture? Yeah. Okay. So can we all come here and then?
L'altra cosa, abans que marxeu, que els que esteu interessats, envieu un mail al comitè, que potser fem una llista de correu o alguna cosa així per veure quina continuïtat li donem, d'acord?